Hey folks, not too long ago I put out a video on speedrunning Gabriel Knight, the 20th anniversary edition. In that video, I interviewed Chris Jewsbury, who worked on the game, and we had a great conversation about all sorts of cool behind-the-scenes stuff. Obviously, I couldn't put all that into the video proper, so I thought I'd share the full interview with you right now.
I'm Chris Jewsbury. I was a scripter and lead cinematics artist on Gabriel Knight, Sins of the Father's 20th Anniversary Edition, or GK20 for short. That means a little bit different things depending on which studio you're in. But for our studio, that means that I built a whole bunch, if not most, of the game logic for the game. So everything that makes the game do the stuff that you want it to do. And then the cinematics is all of the animation sequences that you can actually see Gabriel moving around and talking to people and animating and stuff like that.
So you had a pretty significant role on that project.
Oh, yeah. Since it was probably the biggest role I had since I started at Phoenix. And it was great that they trusted me with so much responsibility building out so much of that game. So that does mean I know most of those scenes inside and out.
How did you get involved with them? When did you start with them?
I started with Phoenix pretty shortly after out of college. I was a animation major I don't want to think about when I graduated, but fresh out of college, and I joined up as a animation volunteer on what was currently their only project, which was Silver Lining Episode 5. Then just sort of grew my position from there because soon after I joined, they had their first Kickstarter for Cognition. So they needed to transition a lot of their volunteer people to work on their paid stuff. So I was there and available, so I learned all of their Unity tools as well. And then I think it was at the end of episode 2 of Cognition, they brought me in to do some freelance work for the paid stuff too.
That's cool. That's really cool. So yeah, I was wondering at what part of the Phoenix timeline you came into it, because as a King's Quest fan, obviously, I'd known about them since the Silver Lining days. But so I get the obvious side question is, so you said you were brought in to work on episode 5. Are we ever going to see that come out?
I really don't know at this point. I bring it up like maybe every year or so. Phoenix is one of those very casual companies. If you get in with them, like I still have all of my contacts in Skype. So occasionally, when something cool happens, like these speed runs, I'm like, hey, have you seen this thing? People are still playing the games, guys, which is great. As to whether we're going to see it, man, I really wish, I hope it'll happen. And if I find time, I'll poke them and say, hey, can I work on it, please? Please?
Yeah, it's one of those things that's sort of we have a joke speed run in the King's Quest community where you can speed run episode 5, but the speed run means time starts when you click on find out info about episode 5. It ends when you scroll to the bottom of the page to find out it's still not out yet. But
the closest thing would be speed running the Halloween VR experience.
True. Now, was that one? I haven't. You kind of lose track of things, and I haven't touched that one. Was that VR only, or can you do that without VR? I can't remember.
I want to say that we released a flat screen version of it.
Okay.
But it has been a couple of years since I looked at it.
Gotcha. Fair enough.
We could go to the download page right now, actually.
Yeah. Yeah,
maybe it'll work because we're several versions of Unity since it was released too.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Yeah. Gotcha. Cool. So, you joined Phoenix, you're at Silver Lining. Did you work on all of their projects through there? So Cognition and then
eventually
Mobius eventually. And
yep. Started with the animation, learned the Unity tools, Um, Started like mid cognition, like I said. And even though I started on like episode 3, I did a lot of support for episode 1 and 2 as well. Like after they were released, came back and did bug fixes. And I was also involved in the mobile optimization for all of those, because they were always intended to also be on mobile platforms, and we had to do all sorts of dynamic loading stuff to get them to work on your phones. So yeah, I have touched all of them and played through Mobius. I've got a couple of memes for Mobius, but you know, nobody but me enjoys them because nobody plays Mobius.
That's one that I still have not gotten around to. It's on my to-do list, but yeah. Speaking of that, so how do I want to ask this? How did it feel learning, and how did you learn that you were going to be working on what was essentially a Jane Jensen game?
She wasn't like a monumental, monolithic figure for me. My like introduction to video gaming in general was probably a little bit later than some people, and adventure games in particular, I didn't really pick up on until I was like, hey, these guys are doing King's Quest. Well, I better play King's Quest to figure out what they're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So I've played them all now, even Gabriel Knight 3, which was rough working on modern systems. But yeah, it was one of those neat things. But it's like, okay, cool. It's not like if we were contracted to work with Cyan or something, that would have been like, ooh, that's the adventure games I come from. So
yeah, gotcha. Fair enough. Yeah, Gabriel Knight 3 is one of those that, yeah, I couldn't. I had a hard time getting into that. I don't think I finished that one. I played the other ones, but I think part of it was getting it to run decent on a modern computer. I'm trying to remember. It's been years since I've tried it, but
yeah, I think nowadays the best way to work that is you have to make sure you're in software rendering mode. Otherwise, it crashes all the time. You can't even try hardware.
Gotcha.
And even then, weird things are transparent and all that stuff.
Oh, the joys of especially that era of computing, like trying to get those games to work. There was that weird transitionary period, right?
Yeah,
when things were going 3D around the end of the 90s, where it's like anything released in that time frame, it's kind of a dice roll, to see if it still runs correctly.
Yeah, it's really weird. Like we can emulate everything through DOS, right? And then very few things Windows 95. But yeah, there's this period between 98 and like XP where those games just can't behave on anything.
So back to GK20, then, one thing I was curious about was what was your experience of working on that? Like, what were some of the more challenging aspects of it? What were the more less challenging and more exciting aspects? How would you sort of, how do you feel about the process of making that now that you look back on it?
I always enjoyed the thing that some people will just be really annoyed at, which was the bug fixing. Because part of like our tools are really easy to mock something up and get it working. And then you give it to a tester and he said, oh, well, yeah, this thing broke and now his head is going circular and spinning around, which that happened a lot, by the way. And chairs are terrible. Like for some reason, sitting down is the worst thing to ever happen in a video game. I don't know why. It's just they try to sit down, they slide over, they try to stand up, and suddenly they're in the chair. They're walking. It's awful. Sitting down is terrible. That's probably the worst bug you have to fix. And every animation will break it. But it just doing the bug fixing, really fun. It's really good for the sort of work that I like doing because it's investigating, it's solving problems, the most challenging thing, like overall. So one monumental thing was getting that hound four the day 9 circle, where you have to walk around and grab all the tablets. For simplicity's sake, each one of those 12 rooms is in one Unity scene. All of the logic for all of the rooms is in one logic diagram. So that means that one room's not too bad. There's a zombie, there's a tablet, probably. You have to have your exits and a little slot in the wall, right? But then you multiply that by 12. You have to make sure, I had to make sure that all of the interactions could be seen in all of the aspect ratios, right? Which is mostly a problem for the bottom door, right? If you want to go south, it was getting cut off by widescreen. And then I had to make sure that Gabriel is always standing in the right spot to pick up the things. Otherwise, everything slides around. Had to add the zoom ins. If anybody uses the zoom ins on the little slots on the wall, and make sure that those worked just like as if you were interacting it without the zoom in. And then have save states for literally everything. So that logic diagram is huge. It would make a good quilt. And even then, it was so complicated. I'm really proud about it. But even then, day 1 on launch day, it was broken. You could not save. There was a bug where you couldn't save in that Hound 4 and then load the save without getting soft locked. So that was like the first patch we did fix that save bug.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, that in looking at a lot of these adventure games, it does seem like at least a lot of the older ones, that they do something similar. If it's something where the room is similar, but you're just changing out the assets, and or like the configuration of something. Like there's a lot of Sierra games where, like, if it's a maze, for instance, it's
exactly.
just it's one room. You're just changing, where the exits are, and
the bayou is the same, and the other Han 4 is the same. It's all one scene. Even the zombie is the same. It just teleports around in the Unity scene. And then it was also being played on mobile, right? So we had to make sure to have the logic so that every time you go into a room, it loads that room and that room only, and then unloads the one you were just in. So yeah, lots of stuff in that scene, but I'm glad it worked out eventually.
Cool. Yeah. So I think you answered one follow-up question I was going to ask. I was going to ask, what were some of the more memorable bugs that you had to fix? And so the Han 4, sounds like one of those. Were there any others that come to mind as like, this stands out as something that was a real pain to fix, or that it was just really funny?
There were some like layer bugs. Like there was a tree in Germany that it's outside the building, but you can see it through a window. And then one day I opened the scene and the tree's just inside the building now. Just some sort of layer thing. It's like, hello there, I am tree. And then again, the speedruns showed at least one instance of Gabriel's head just lolling around, That happened all the time. And it was always great to see it, because we never quite understood what was going on. We just had to like deal with it. It was something to do with the IK setup of the character, and then playing a FK animation on top of that, and then those transitions and weird so it's one of the reasons why the legs never mess up, is because they're locked with IK procedurally.
So what are IK and FK? I don't know what those mean.
Sorry, inverse kinematic and forward kinematic. Inverse kinematic is where you're animating a target, right? So if I'm doing my hand, right, I animate the hand to where I want it to go, okay? And then the arm follows it. That's inverse. for forward kinematic, you animate the joints in the arm to get the hand where you want to go. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Gotcha.
So the legs are generally driven by inverse kinematics, so that they always know where the ground is. Okay. But then the rest of the animations are forward, because that's just easier, because it's not procedurally done, and it's easier to export the animations and then put it into Unity that way.
Gotcha. So you never quite figured out why the head goes crazy, like
No.
exactly why.
We didn't understand why it happened. We just knew how to mitigate the problem.
Okay.
Yeah, and that it happened in all of the games that were Unity based. So in Cognition, Mobius, yeah, it showed up all the time.
That's fun. I mean, yeah, obviously something you have to fix, but you know, at least from a speedrun perspective, or from, I guess, a nerdy perspective of, you know, people who like to figure out how the games work and what's behind them. You know, after you've had a decent casual experience, seeing a game explode is kind of fun.
Oh, yeah.
So that's cool. Cool. So you mentioned in Discord about having to talk Jane out of the hidden object puzzles, or at least a full-on hidden object puzzle. Was there anything else like that where, you know, or just like fun production stories of like, yeah, we were planning on this, but it didn't work out?
There were a couple of like minor puzzles, quote unquote, that didn't make final. Like there was something where it was just some extra interaction stuff that really we could have done it, but it didn't add anything. It was just real padding. Like the one thing that sort of felt right was getting the key out of the chest in Grandma's attic. Remember, where you have to move the books and get stuff out of the way, right? That sort of thing. Like there was one where you had to do some weird thing with pins in the Voodoo Museum in that little zoom in, and some weird unlocking mechanism to get into the Seke Madele or whatever it was. There's little things like that besides the hidden object things. So I think one of the reasons we didn't do the hidden object things was there wasn't a lot of them. The zoom ins are still in the game. We use the art assets, and that's stuff like the one in the Gabriel's bookshop, right, where you get the tweezers. The one in the last town where you get the costume, and the Voodoo Museum. So we found uses for the art. But yeah, most of that was okay. I think one thing that was brought up during the speed run was how more locked off the game was. And part of that was intentional, partially for remaking it for modern audiences so that you're not like missing things. I don't remember if Gabriel Knight originally had like soft locks. I don't think it did, but
I'm trying to think. There were like minor ones. Like, so if you went through the swamp, and then, you know, I wonder, can you save in the middle of Dr. John interrogating you? Because if you go through the swamp and then don't have the tattoo, I mean, you're hosed. So there might be a way to like save in the middle of that where you. But I can't remember.
I mean, that's just you didn't save earlier,
right? Or I guess the big one is if you go down to the hidden Han4 underneath St. Louis Cathedral, and then you let the elevator go back up without putting the staff in. Yeah, that'll soft lock you. But
anyway. We tried to avoid those as well because they don't feel good.
Yeah.
But part of the reason why the game is more locked off than the original was because of the mobile release, which I think it's day one. I think day one is or was like free, and then you could buy the other days in packs of 2 or 3. So to accommodate that, it had to be designed so that certain things were locked off in days, because otherwise it would just be a nightmare to try to say, well, they have these days, but they can still do this thing that we kind of want them to know in day 3, but they're in day 2, a bit of a mess. So that's why some of that design is in there.
Yeah, it is an interesting, like, reading some walkthroughs of the original, because there are things you can do in different orders, and so sometimes if you're like jumping into the middle of a walkthrough, if you need a hint, it doesn't quite work because they assume that you did things on some days and other ones. So speaking of like the extra puzzles and things, so some of those extra puzzles did make it in. I'm thinking of like the squirrel that knocks over the jar in the cemetery.
Yeah.
Do you remember? I mean, I know obviously it wasn't your decision, but do you remember any of the conversations around the design of like why Jane wanted those in, or whether there was a discussion of we just want to have the original game but update the graphics? And
no. At that point, I was getting a good bit of the conversations with Jane secondhand. I did have some mentions where it's like there were a couple times where we got polled for what things do you think are broken, or what do you think about some of these designs, and we did get to put in our feedback of no, we don't like this. But for some of those like smaller things like the squirrel, it just sort of happened one day and it just popped up in my tasks. It's like, add the logic for knocking over a vase. It's like, why are we doing this? Because I'm pretty sure that was added mid development. Like, it started where you only needed the $100. And then eventually we had to have a reason to actually go to the graveyard. And that reason had to be, oh, well, you need 20 extra bucks. That was just gifted to you by a squirrel. I don't know why for that in particular case.
Yeah, that's one that does, it stumps us as to why. And especially too, because I think if I remember right, the trigger for it is reading all the names on a gravestone.
Yeah.
So it makes even less sense.
Talk to all of his ancestors.
So I don't know.
Yeah,
it seems like there's a more straightforward way of getting an extra $20, but what do I know?
Hey, Grace, can you lend me $20, please?
There you go.
You haven't even paid me for last week.
Oh, I love it. Cool. All right, awesome. So there's that. Oh yeah, I did want to ask this. So I mean, obviously you're working on this for a while. It's Gabriel Knight. How did you feel leading up to the release, and then how did you feel about the public reception to it? Because it's Gabriel Knight. People have expectations. So,
oh, it was great. Like, I was really proud of it on release, even with the bug, which I found like the day after. And at least at the time, and still on Steam, reviews are very positive. Like, we understand that people miss the old voice actors, but 20 years on, nobody could afford them, especially not our couple of dev teams. But we really like the voice actors we did get. Gabriel in particular is in most of Phoenix's games. He is actually the voice of King Graham too in Silver Lining, which I thought was really cool. But yeah, it was great seeing that we liked it and other people liked it. So it's kind of fallen off more for mobile releases because we just haven't had the manpower or the money to update some of these. And we know that they're broken, but it's one of those annoying things where Phoenix does not have the manpower or the profit motive, unfortunately, to go back and update them for modern systems sometimes.
Gosh, are they? So I haven't tried them on mobile. Are they? So they're broken on mobile right now, or not? Maybe not all of them, but a number of them.
Maybe not on like all versions, but like I downloaded Gabriel Knight onto my phone, and which is a few years old now, and it won't boot up. I know Cognition. I think Cognition has been removed from a couple of the storefronts just because it does not work anymore, which is really unfortunate. It's not the worst thing to go into Unity and rebuild, but to get the current version Android build stuff, right, you need the current version of Unity. And we did do engine upgrades a couple of times over development, and those always add new bugs. So it's not just as easy as loading it up and building it again. It would break again, unfortunately. So yeah.
I can understand that, especially at at the scale of a studio like Phoenix. You don't have unlimited time or budget to go back and spend and also because I imagine you don't know how much time it's going to take.
Yeah, exactly. You estimate, and then it's always going to take 3 times longer than what your estimate was.
So let's talk about the speedrun just for a moment then. So in April, Lemmings, running this, how did it feel to watch the game be speedrun?
Oh, I was really glad to see somebody just playing it in the first place. I've occasionally dropped in on streamers whenever they play one of our games, just because it's great seeing other people enjoying it, no matter how they're playing the darn thing. I was interested when it started that the estimate was like 3 times shorter than my glitchless PB. So I'm glad that the powers of that B made the run possible as it is. No, it was great. And everybody got to see some of those bugs, like head waggling Gabriel and somewhat.
So the $1 million question, why does pressing the B key give control back to the player?
Right. So each of our animation sequences in the engine, if they're not set to a background sequence, these are things like that control animations of background characters. They will increment a busy counter, which is just an integer that the game is checking for. And if it's larger than 0, then the game says, okay, we're currently doing something. The player should not have control of their cursor, the inventory, all that stuff. They're not going to be. So we turn that off. And then when the sequence is over, it decrements it. And then as long as busy is 0 or less, then the game says, okay, you can play the game now. Click away, right? On Gabriel, there's a script called the Gabriel Watcher, which usually doesn't do keyboard things. But right next to the button that lets you turn on the FPS counter, yes, the game has an FPS counter, by the way, is B. And that calls the function to reset the busy counter to 0. So what happens is you hit B, and the game's like, oh, I must not be busy anymore. Let me just turn the cursor back on and give you the inventory. And who cares if all the animation is still playing? Now you can click around. So that's what's going on. The game's like, hey, well, I'm not busy. I guess you can play now.
So that was put in there for debug purposes?
I don't think so, because I certainly never used it. I couldn't get in touch with the lead tester before the interview, but I did talk to Richard Flores, who was executive producer, and his best guess, it was probably put in for Jane, because she would have much less tolerance for going through all of the things. But we don't really know if it was actually intended for that at this point. and we don't know if anybody actually used it. So it's just sort of there for some reason.
Even more mysterious.
Yeah.
This sounds like something that Gabe should investigate.
Yeah. What do you know about B? There's probably, there might be some like archive somewhere that still has the commit history that we could track down somewhere. But yeah, we don't know. It's just sort of there. But don't worry, it's not going to get fixed. We think it's really cool.
Oh, I love it. What, out of curiosity, what key is the FPS key?
I think it's Z. Okay. I think it's Z. It was.
I'm sure I could just jam on a keyboard and you see what it is, but
it doesn't like work too well. It's obscured by the points counter in the top left.
Okay.
And I think that was mostly added for mobile as well, so that we could just track to see how the performance was going on there. Because I think I turned it on, I was getting like 120 FPS on PC or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a hilarious feature, and knowing that at least currently no one knows why it's there is even better. Because I mean, at least for this game, it just amuses me because in some speed games, you have like dozens of small little tricks, and all this really complicated stuff. And here it's just press the B key. Just keep pressing it. There is some, there is some mental work you have to do because some of the runners were explaining to me that when you do that, you have to be sure not to do too much or like leave the room too early, because then sometimes flags don't get set and then you soft lock yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
And you have to be aware of that throughout like the entire thing.
Some of those flags are put in so that they activate immediately when the sequence starts, and those are pretty safe. But yeah, there's some that only trigger after the sequence is over. So you have to wait until that sequence completes before all that stuff triggers.
Yeah, I remember after it was first found, I think the Wolfs, who was the one who was commenting on the GDQ run, he had a stream where he was trying to finish a run, and I think he played it for like somewhere between 4 and 6 hours. And didn't finish a single run just because he was still figuring out where the flags were and where the triggers were, and kept soft locking himself. Eventually, they figured it out. But
yeah, I'm sorry it isn't more consistent. It was definitely something where we were building it up and put things in as it felt logical, right? Like you don't want to give somebody an item and then, I mean, you could have the item technically appear in your inventory before the animation finishes of him picking it up. But like, why would you bother? They're going to watch this animation, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Right. Yeah, nobody faults, or at least in our corner of the internet, nobody faults developers for making reasonable assumptions about what players should do.
Yeah.
So
I was annoyed. I had been watching GDQ even during development. So there was some small amount of speed running going through at least my head when I was building things. And I was very annoyed. I had to disable mapping out of the confessional in the cathedral, just because if you mapped out and then came back in, the background wouldn't load in. But somehow with the power of B, you can just map out anyway, which was very weird seeing that happen. It's a very minor thing from me, but it's like, how? I know I fixed that. I know I did.
Cool. Well, anything else about GK20, that whole experience that I haven't asked you about that you'd like to mention?
So all of the backgrounds are 2D, right? And we have a rendering pipeline so that we do have a 3D set in each of the scenes, and it has a shader on it so that it can obscure all the 3D stuff and let the background through. And that's how you can have Gabriel and all the characters walk behind stuff, right? Phoenix did not create most of those backgrounds. They were from early development before Phoenix was part of the project. And there was some touch up done to a number of them and cutting out a few things for like layering reasons. But most of the backgrounds were already made and we had to deal with it. So we had to lock off a camera and then model the set after the fact. Most of them are not in perspective, and it's not even close. So if you take a minute and look really hard, or not even hard at all, at Napoleon House in particular, everything is wonky in that scene. Like the bar is at a weird angle because otherwise it would be too thick for the bartender to be able to reach over and give you the drink. The cubby in the back is super tiny and barely fits the guy sitting there. None of the tables are circular at all. And the door is properly modeled. It's a 3D thing, but the door frame is big and has huge holes in it that just barely look right from this one angle and no other angles. So it was a nightmare making some of those scenes look right because they're not in perspective at all.
That's hilarious. I need to look at a screenshot of Napoleon House. Hold on.
And I think it might be that part of it was trying to emulate the original, right? Which was 2D and had some space, but since we were dealing with 3D characters in a 3D world that looked 2D or that was painted as 2D, some of those concessions just did not translate great and was a real pain to get working.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. I never really like scrutinized this scene before. So when you said like certain angles, so did you just get the 2D backgrounds, or did you get like a 3D thing that you had to figure out what angle to put the camera at and then sort of stamp it at 3D or 2D?
We had the 2D camera, or no, we had the 2D background. We had to match it in Maya and then get our camera set so that it matched the floor plane as much as possible, because that's the big thing. You want to make sure that the floor is flat so that characters are walking on a flat ground. And then change our focal length on the camera and keep all those settings and then model the set on the background. And that's why so many of them are wonky, because there's no straight pillars in like the entire game.
Well, to your credit, I mean, I'm watching the scene now, and it's like it's not, at least to an untrained eye, like it's not awful.
Yeah,
like I'm not watching this like, oh my gosh, I mean, my eyes are bleeding or something. So, kudos to you and the team.
Yeah. If you've seen like behind the scenes stuff for the Link's Awakening remake,
I haven't.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I haven't seen behind the scenes stuff of it. No.
Yeah. Well, what they did was they bias everything towards the camera. So instead of the direct top-down view, everything is tilted like 30 degrees north, right? It's sort of like that in this game, only the difference is that all of the 3D stuff is transparent. So it's that sort of annoying thing where we had to have this camera angle because these backgrounds look this way, and that's the original. But the original camera angle was not made for 3D. And we at least wanted to be faithful enough to keep the one locked off camera, which made things a lot easier, by the way. If you look at our other games, there's like several different camera angles for talking and conversations and things.
No, that's cool. No, I appreciate you telling me that. I'm going to have to go through the scenes now and kind of really scrutinize it. Cool. Awesome. Well, yeah. Anything else that you wanted to share before we hit the stop recording button?
No, I think that just about covers it.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thank you for talking with me. We'll chat for just a second after I hit stop recording, but really appreciate you coming on here and sharing your expertise.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Thanks.